Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer. My guest on the podcast today has not minced his words about the Iran war, calling it a resounding strategic failure for both the U.S. and Israel, but mostly for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has dedicated so much of his political career to pursuing the goal of removing the Iranian threat from Israel, or at least promising to do so. Danny Citrinowicz is a senior researcher in the Iran and Shiite Axis program at the Institute for National Security Studies. Before that, he spent 25 years in Israel Defense Intelligence, including a stint at the head of the Iran branch in the Research and Analysis Division. Danny, welcome to the Haaretz Podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
The whole world is focused right now on deal or no deal in Iran, but you've been stepping back and talking about the big picture, about the mistakes that Israel and the United States have made regarding the war. Can you talk to us about what you see as the biggest missteps and miscalculations? And in retrospect, was the whole 2026 attack on Iran itself a mistake in a way that Israel's attack in 2025 was not? Or do you think we would have been better off if neither one had happened?
I think it's a very important question given where we stand right now. Again, we don't know if it's going to be an agreement. We are closest as we ever been to an agreement, but doesn't say there will be an agreement. I think President Trump has very bad options. And the least bad probably is reaching an agreement on the Iranian terms. So that's where we stand right now. And regarding, I think, looking at the broader picture, the 30,000 feet picture, I think when you're combining the two wars that Israel conducted, the 12-day war, and now the war that started on 28th of February, those wars definitely had some operational achievements, but both of them are strategic failure. And I think that it resonates in a way that it's not only a failure in terms of what happened in June and in February, but actually it's a collapse of the whole Israeli strategy regarding Iran, claiming that only force eventually will bring this regime to an end. And I think that this drive for misunderstanding of the Iranian resilience and the fact that Israel has no capacity kinetically to replace the regime in Iran. And I think that Israel went to this war together with the US, thinking that you can topple this regime, killing Ali Khamenei, first time that Israel killed a leader of another state. And actually Israel failed because at the end of the day, the plan was flawed from the beginning. All the issues from the Kurds to Ahmadinejad, we overestimated the air power and underestimated the Iranian resilience. So the bottom line of things that it's not only that Israel fell in the war, but actually we created a war strategic reality in a way that we have a more extreme regime, decentralized regime, and even more than that, I don't think they will see any future president, US president, that will help Israel. And without the US support, Israel cannot do it by itself. So it's not only a failure now, but actually a failure, a collapse of the Israeli strategy regarding Iran as a whole.
And you, among others, have said that there's a boomerang effect, that this may be motivating Iran more to acquire nuclear weapons when the goal was to denuclearize Iran?
Definitely. I'm not a fan of Ali Khamenei, and he wasn't a pragmatist. But he was a guy that was afraid to cross the Rubicon in reaching a nuclear bomb. By the way, nobody's claiming, not in Israel and not the American intel community, that Khamenei ever instructed to build a bomb after 2003 when he neglected the military direction aspect of the Iranian nuclear program. And what we created is actually a more extreme regime, that we have the RGC highly dominant within the regime itself, and the regime is headed by Mustafa Khamenei, a radical leader that wants to avenge the death of his father, his mother, his wife, and his daughter. And even worse than that, I think all of them understand right now that the only way to protect Iran from any attack in the future will be to build a nuclear bomb. And despite all the achievement that we had in Midnight Hammer and this operation, in the end of the day, Iran still holds the capacity to reach a bomb. It has the enriched uranium, it has the centrifuges, and I think that we have to assume that it has the capacity to move forward if it wants to. So what actually we created, it's a war that was meant to prevent Iran from reaching a bomb, might be the war that actually push Iran beyond the Rubicon to reach a bomb. And I think this is another important element that we have to remember. Again, I don't know how this war will end and what will agreement, if agreement will include, but I think that we have to assume that without an agreement and with this extreme regime continuing to control Iran, then the nuclear question will become highly important for them and they will think hard and clear to change their policy and rush into a bomb. I have no doubt about it.
Do we have a clear picture at the moment of who's in charge in Iran? Much has been made of a possible division between the political leadership and the military.
I wouldn't overestimate those frictions. We had those frictions from 79. So I don't think it's matters in terms of, it's not weakening the regime as might people think. But I want to say something about this regime. We are in what we call the Iranian Revolution 3.0. We had 1.0, Khomeini returning back to France, exiled, very ill. Most of his time was fighting against Iraq. We have Sadaneh 2.0, very dominant leader, started as a very weak one and becoming a very dominant leader, the ultimate decision maker in Iran. Now we have, for the first time, we have a decentralized Iran, meaning that, yes, we still have a supreme leader, but I think the RGC are highly dominant in the decision-making process. It's more or less, it's not exactly a military junta, but it's some sort of highly influenced RGC working together with Mujtaba. We have to remember that Mujtaba would never be elected to supreme leader if his father wouldn't be decapitated. So Mujtaba owed the RGC the fact that he was elected to become a supreme leader. That fact and the fact that he really has no experience, nothing, and they have the upper hand, actually allow them to influence him dramatically. Now he has to sign everything. This is why we are waiting for last signature of him regarding the agreement, and it's very hard because he's hiding somewhere. They're afraid from decapitation or whatever. But I think that what we have right now is really highly influenced regime by the RGC officers, and this is something that will escort us toward the future. Again, we don't know how Mujtaba will behave in the future, whether he's going to be like his father in the future, because now it's very weak. But I think it's safe to say that for now, and maybe for the medium term, we'll have a regime that will be highly influenced by the RGC officers, and we have to get used to it. Iran will be different than Iran that we saw in the past.
You've written that one of the most serious consequences of what's happening now is the erosion of deterrence vis-a-vis Iran, and specifically the loss of the implicit sword hanging over Iran as it considers whether to move towards nuclear weapons capability. Can you talk about deterrence and how it's been damaged?
In the past, the only way that we thought that we could deter Iran from moving into a nuclear bomb or building sophisticated weapons was saying to them, listen, if you do that, we'll attack you, we'll decapitate the leadership, we'll try to topple the regime. And actually, it had an effect, especially on Ali Khamenei. But what happened now is actually we fulfill the threat. We work together, Israel and the US together, the two most strongest air forces in the world. We attack them, we bomb them everywhere. And the bottom line, I think that we have the more radicalized regime, still have the capacity to launch missiles and drones. And as I mentioned, also theoretically has the potential to move into a nuclear bomb. So the thing is that we already did what we had to do in terms of implementing the deterrence, and nothing happened. Even worse than that, the Iranians now understand that we are fighting in a very constrained surrounding. Israel is highly depending on the US. We are highly depending on the ammunition coming from the US. We're highly depending on air defense coming from the US. So actually, it was not only that it highlighted our strength, but also our, let's say, weaknesses. So sum it all up, the problem is that at the end of the day, I think that the Iranians will think, okay, if we're rushing to a bomb in the future, what Israel and the US can do to me that they didn't do in the war itself, and maybe they'll feel more emboldened to do things that they were fearing to do in the past. Connected to the fact that we have GC, Revolutionary Guard, very extreme element, then I think that it will be very hard to use threats towards Iran in the future.
And the Iranians see that we're not willing to go all the way, that nobody is willing to commit ground troops to really try to invade and overturn the regime. So by staying sort of intransigent and not compromising in the negotiations, Iran's essentially calling our bluff.
You are touching a very important point. When you're going to a campaign to topple this regime, you have to invest everything that you have. Boots on the ground, lengthy campaign for months and months. And maybe then you can reach an agreement, your purpose, your target. But what happened here is that after 3 days, they all knew that nothing will happen. Now, Israel thought about replacing the boots on the ground with the Kurds or with Ahmadinejad. It was hopeless from the beginning. But what actually it highlighted the fact that there is no interest, especially from the US side, to invest boots on the ground. Now, I'm not criticizing the US. This is the fact. But what it's created is understanding in Iran that they always have the constraints, Israel and the US. And even more than that, at the end of the day, US is interested in an agreement, because they don't want to find ourselves sending troops on the ground. Again, can happen. I don't know theoretically. I think practically we see the President Trump highly deterred from it. So the bottom line of things is that a campaign that started to topple the regime was highly constrained because of the constraints of ammunition and the fear from sending boots on the ground and relying on the Kurds and all those things. And that has created a worse reality because the regime that you wanted to topple, now we have to strengthen it if you want to stop the war. Because at the end of the day, if you want to reach an agreement, you have to give them something economically and you strengthen them. All the constraints led to the problem that it's not that we didn't achieve our goals, definitely goes without saying, but also we created a worse reality that now to change it will be very hard to do so.
And while their power in the Strait of Hormuz might have been theoretical before, now it's concrete and proven.
That's at the end another problem of the campaign. President Trump looking for a winning picture, and I understand now, but Hormuz cannot be a winning picture because Hormuz was open before the war started. It's a byproduct of the war itself, so we cannot use it as a winning picture. And even worse than that, we cannot return back to the status quo ante of the 28th of February. It's not going to happen. The Iranians demanding control of the Straits. Now, of course, they will take money. They will call it for environmental issues. They want people to acknowledge sovereignty, but maybe they will find something. We're acknowledging the right of Iran or something like that. I don't know what. But the bottom line of things is that we're not going to turn back. Every ship that will leave the Straits will have to go back and forth with the Iranians. That will be the reality from now for the future. I don't know if they're going to take money, yes or no, but they will demand to implement their sovereignty over the Strait themselves. And this is something they're not going to go away. Now, if you want to change this reality, you have to turn back to war. You have to use boots on the ground, things that President Trump doesn't want to do. So this is where we are right now. And unfortunately, I don't think it will change towards the future. What was won't return back, but even worse than that. Even if now we turn back to war in 2 months' time, 2 years' time, whatever, we all know what will happen first. They will close the Straits, and we know the implications on the international economy, and we know it will take centuries to find ways with pipelines, whatever, to bypass the Hormuz Strait. So we're in a major problem here.
You've been analyzing Iran for so many years, so many decades. Wouldn't it have been obvious to anyone that the move in the Strait of Hormuz is something that they would turn to and that it would put a stranglehold on the world's oil?
Well, of course, every war game, we knew it would be the first thing that Iran will do. The Iranians said that from the beginning of the war. Actually, they practiced, they trained to hold straits before the war. Everybody could see that. I think the problem wasn't that they didn't know. I think that President Trump, President Netanyahu, especially President Trump, assumed that the war will end before they will close the straits. In 3 days, like President Trump said to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, in 3 days, the war will be over. Of course, it didn't and continued. And that's a problem because then Iran could implement all the plan that it had before. So I don't think they didn't know. I think that they were highly confident that they were able to topple this regime before the regime will close the straits. And it didn't happen. And now we have a mountain to climb because, as I mentioned, this reality will be the new reality. I don't think as long as this regime is there in Iran, I don't see any dramatic change in that.
The issue of deterrence, do you think that this is going to have wider implications for conflicts outside of Iran with other nations? Can it potentially embolden, as far as the U.S. is concerned, Russia and China, and for Israelis, other potential antagonists?
Unfortunately, yes, for Russia and China. I think they're enjoying, unfortunately, to see the U.S. leading ammunition. We all know that even now, the U.S. cannot sell Tomahawks to Japan because they are missing, because they use so much in the war itself. And let alone everything related to their air defense system, the THAAD and the SM-3s. And they have a major problem. And I think that Chinese are enjoying that because if they will decide to annex Taiwan militarily, then there is a real question whether the U.S. will try to prevent that or which capacity given what's happening in the Gulf. So for them, I'm not saying continuing of the war is good for them because the Chinese also depending on the price of oil, but I think that for them, they're not unhappy to see what's happening in the war. And of course, for them, it's important to strengthen the regime in Iran because in the strategic competition between China and the US, for China, it's important that Iran will stay as it is and not going to have a Western support or Western regime or regime support by the West itself. So definitely we have a problem in terms of the deterrence of the US regarding China. Same thing goes to Russia in a way that we see the relations between NATO and the US in the backdrop of this event. And I think it's another problem because of the fact that the Russians are enjoying it and they love to see the frictions, unfortunately. So When you sum it all up, yes, definitely the US were able to show its capacity, strength, and it was important, but you have to remember that it didn't achieve the goal. And now they have mounting to climb in terms of rebuilding their ammunition, the defensive one and offensive one. Regarding Israel, I think the problem is less about the kinetics because we have a bigger problem. And the problem is that we cannot solve the open conflict that we have in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria. It's taking its toll on the IDF. The chief of staff always saying that. We don't have enough soldiers. And now we have another problem in Lebanon. I don't know how we're going to get out of it. It's a strategic trap by Hezbollah. And even worse than that, I don't think that this war, it didn't change anything in terms of the Israeli status among the Gulf states. I think that most of them still see Israel as an undermining player in the region. And without moving on the Palestinian route, nobody will move forward on normalization, despite what President Trump or Senator Graham saying. So I don't think that this war actually changed something. It just opened another front that is actually eroding our pillars of strength in terms of economically, militarily, everything related to the Israeli public. I don't think that we got something positive coming out from this war regarding these issues.
And you've talked about Israel's exposure in this conflict, the exposure of Israel's deep operational and strategic dependence on the United States. We've always known it's there, but do you think there's been damage done to Israel in terms of how clear and obvious this conflict has made that?
Yeah, when you're looking at the results after the 12-day war, that Israel did that, most of it without the U.S. Definitely we had an achievement, but you cannot compare working with the U.S., with the power of the U.S., or working alone. We created damage, but the Iranians rebuilt the damage and moved forward. So definitely in that regard, we need the U.S. We need the U.S. in terms of defense, as I mentioned, the air defense capabilities that they have, but also in terms of the ammunition. At the end of the day, yes, we have highly capable pilots. I'm not underestimating that. On the contrary, I think they are very brave to do what they did. But without the F-35, we are not building the F-35 and not the F-15. And we are not producing the most of the bombs that we are using. And of course, in terms of, even the everything connected to the logistics and the shipping and all those things, we're highly dependent of the U.S. And it is this war actually highlighted that, and even worse than that, we fought with the U.S. We had the U.S. might. At the end of the day, we didn't achieve our goals. So it's becoming worse than we even started the war itself. And I think that this dependence, it's a problematic, not because we are depending on the U.S. I think the problematic thing that we are perceived in the U.S. as the one who pushed the administration for a very bad and misleading war. And this is a problem because in the future, I'm not sure we'll have this kind of support because the notion in the U.S. with the Democrats and also with the Republicans, most of them, is that the U.S., yes, we need to support it, but we cannot send money, send weapons as we did in this war itself. So the problem of Israel is not only now, but it's also looking to the future after the midterm and after President Trump will finish his presidency, what will happen the day after. And this is I'm very worried that we won't have this kind of a support and it actually will limit the Israeli ability to act militarily.
Turning to Lebanon for a moment, you mentioned Lebanon. In the wake of Netanyahu's statements that he is determined to crush Hezbollah at the same time as these negotiations with Iran are continuing, how much does the problem of Lebanon complicate the Iran negotiations? Do you believe that the U.S. could potentially agree to a limitation on Israel's freedom to act against Hezbollah in Lebanon? And if it does, do you think Israel would adhere to such a U.S. restriction? Could it even buck the will of Donald Trump in that regard?
Israel will follow everything that Donald Trump will say. Period. Stop. Yes, we'll try to work it. We'll try to challenge it. Netanyahu will call Trump. But if what Trump will decide to do A, we'll do A. He'll tell us to do Z, we'll do Z. This is the price of fighting with the U.S. You're getting the might, but to also surrender to their wishes, and that's what can happen. In terms of Lebanon, we have to say one thing. We don't have a strategy there. We don't know what we're doing there. It's a catastrophe. I'm not even mentioning the quadcopters. It's a tactical thing. Strategically, I don't know what we're doing. And even if we'll increase the attacks in Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, whatever, it's not going to change anything because Hezbollah changes policy. And he's not going to surrender. And he's not going to allow us to attack without retaliation, like we did before we started the war against Iran. So we are in a very complex situation over there. We need to work with the Lebanese government to strengthen them, to understand that this is the only way. There is no kinetic solution to the Lebanese problem. We cannot dismantle Hezbollah by force. Now, in terms of Iran, they will insist that there will be a ceasefire in Lebanon, because for them it's important to preserve Hezbollah as a strategic asset, goes without saying. So they will force it. And again, I don't know what will happen on the ground, whether they're going to have still clashes, yes or no. But I highly doubt that we'll see Israel attacking in Beirut if the war will end with an agreement. And I think that President Trump, if he wants to have an agreement with Iran, then he won't have any other choice, because I don't think that the Iranians will let go. For them, they're creating the linkage between Iran and Lebanon is strategically crucial as to protecting their missiles and nuclear program. So I'm not a bearer of good news here. I think this is what will happen in the end.
There's been buzz this week, maybe it's wishful thinking, that an Iran agreement could be paired with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Pakistan joining the Abraham Accords, most prominently by Senator Lindsey Graham. You called on social media, I noticed, for an end to the false expectations surrounding Israel-Saudi normalization. Can you talk about those false expectations?
Yeah, look, this is so detached from reality. Again, I understand the goodwill coming from President Trump or Senator Graham, and I hope to visit Saudi Arabia very soon. I really hope so. It's a beautiful country. But it's not going to happen, because we have to remember one important thing. Iran is not a solution for all of Israeli diplomatic and security problems. We cannot focus on Iran, like Netanyahu tried to do, or Bennett, and use that as a leverage to overcome the Palestinian issue. At the end of the day, normalization will happen between Israel and Saudi Arabia only if Israel will do tangible activities toward the two-state solution. If we're not going to do that, there's not going to be any normalization. Now, even worse than that, most of the countries in the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, believe that Israel is an undermining player in the region, almost as Iran and even more than Iran. And they were against this war from begin with. They knew it's not going to serve their interest. So they're blaming also Israel. So the fact is that you won't have a normalization with the Saudis, and the Saudis are the key to the Omanis, to the Lebanese, to the Indonesian, or whatever, without Israel moving on the Palestinian track. The road to normalization goes through Ramallah, not through Tehran. And this is why I think that all the declarations are so disconnect from reality, so detached from reality, that we have to stop it by saying, listen, this is the ground truth. Nothing going to change here. Normalization equals moving forward on the Palestinian route. The Iranian route has no connection to normalization, despite the fact that Lindsey Graham keep claiming that it's not going to happen.
Danny Citrinowicz from the Institute for National Security Studies. Thank you so much for your cogent analysis and for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Danny Citrinowicz, and to producer and editor Adi Shacham. If you'd like to keep listening to the podcast and never miss an episode, subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And if you're inclined, leave us a comment and a 5-star rating so more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, do not forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.